Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you in these final days before Pesach. I hope everyone's Pesach preparations are going nicely. If you're traveling, I hope all your travels go smoothly. If you're cooking, I hope all your cooking goes swimmingly. Should be a time of peace and redemption for the Jewish people locally in Israel and around the world. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the Haggadah today. If you have a Haggadah handy, that will be helpful, but if not, not to worry. There won't be a quiz after the class. But hopefully some of the material that we cover will be food for discussion and hopefully provoke some further questions and further thoughts about the Seder that we'll be engaged in just a few days. So what I'd like to do today is really just take you through. We'll see how many we can get through, but maybe 10 or 15 kind of short, concise nuggets that I hope can be unpacked and discussed further and thought about either between now and the Seder, at the Seder, or both. So please feel free to interject with questions or comments along the way, and we'll proceed mostly in order, from the beginning. A couple of these thoughts I've shared with you in the past, but predominantly, it's my hope to share new material with you today. So we begin with Halach Manya. And the question that we have to ask is, of course, the door is closed, the table is set, the guests are seated, and is this legitimately an invitation? We say, oh, anybody who needs the place, come and join us. But if we were really serious, we would have invited them, 3 weeks ago, or at the Jewish Center, 6 weeks ago. So what's the function of an invitation once everyone is seated? And Rav Kook and others has suggested that whether or not anyone is actually hearing the invitation, what's important is for us to make the declaration, because the the first instinct of the liberated Jewish soul is to give, right? It's an affirmation of what it is that we value, and the affirmation of what it is that's important to us. And what's important to us is hachnasas orchim, and generosity and welcoming and tzedakah. And so it's not an accident that we begin the Seder with those words, because that frames everything that comes with the sense of being free to serve Hashem. Wanted to share a thought from Rabbi Moshe Harlap, one of the students of Rav Kook, about the Manish Tana. Of course, the Manishtana comes from the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that the child will ask questions and the parents will answer those questions, and the whole structure of the Seder is this question and answer format, a conversation between parents and children, and a conversation between generations. And Rav Charlap writes that, again, this is kind of, you could see Rav Kook writing this. He says, divisions between children and parents are the epitome of exile, right? That's what it means to feel a sense of alienation. You feel that most acutely from the people you are closest to. And the gap, and there's always, right? There's always these tensions, and there's always these fractions and fissures between parents and children. And it's fascinating to notice that when we came to Egypt, we came as a family. Right? It's Yaakov ubeito, and it's the family. It's the family of Yaakov. That's the Jewish people. We're not a Jewish people yet. It's just one family. 3 generations: parents, children, and grandparents. And it was an assault on the family that was the project of the Egyptians. So the idea was that we're gonna wipe out the male children, and that caused, as we know from the famous Medrash, that caused families to husbands and wives to separate. And there was this sense that the Jewish family was under assault. So when we leave Egypt, what's the principal obligation? The whole project of Korban Pesach, if you go back to the 12th chapter of Sefer Shmos, so it's Sela Beis Avos, Sela Bais. How do you have a Korban Pesach? You gather the family together. You can't function as an individual. You have to function as a family unit. That's the only way to fulfill these mitzvos. It's the only way to fulfill these obligations. And that becomes the operative theme of Seder night, right? We want to put the family together at the table, and we want to put generations in conversations with each other. And so it's little wonder that the Seder opens and this dominates. The whole Seder is going to be a conversation between one generation and the next, because the greatest antidote to the opposition of the Egyptians is a reaffirmation of the project of what it is to constitute a Jewish family across generations. Now, as you know, there's a debate in the Gemara as to where to start the story. So, and we've talked about this in the past, and I'll just share a nugget and one new observation this morning. There's a lot of answers to this question, and we basically throw in the kitchen sink. Right? So the analogy I always give is if you were writing the history of the state of Israel. So where do you start the book? Do you start the book in 1948, in 1947, in 1917, in 1896, with David HaMelech, with Yehoshua, with Avadim Hayinu? Like, where would you start? Right? There's an argument to be made for any of those dates. Right? At some point, it's going to be a question of preference. It's going to be a question of taste. How much context? How much history? What do we want to focus on? And so we recognize that there's an open question at the Seder. How does this story begin? The debate in the Gemara was whether or not it's Avadim Hayinu or Mitchila Obde Avodah Zarah Hayevusenu. Do we start with Egypt, or do we go even back to the prehistory, and do we start with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? And the debate in the Mishnah and the Gemara rather is unsettled, and so we do both. We have both paragraphs in the Haggadah, and which is bizarre, right? Normally, a book has only chapter one. But our book has many chapter ones. And then there are even, further coded references. Maybe by dipping, we're symbolically going back to Yosie. That's also not a bad place to start the story. How do we end up in Egypt, of all places? We were people living in Canaan. Oh, there was a story with the sale of Yosie, and he ended up getting bought and ended up being an Egyptian slave. And then he rose to power and he brought his brothers down because of the famine. That's a perfectly legitimate, valid place to start the story. So there is a question, though, right? Really, you could make a case for Yosef, but can you really make a case for Abraham? That's pretty far back, right? Why are we going all the way back to Abraham? From a theological perspective, it's just worth noticing that the story of Abraham is actually a precursor on a local level to the story of the Exodus on a national level. And I say this is true from a theological perspective. What happened to Abraham? Abraham was the story, and you can go back and see this in the Rambam, who writes this in the first chapter of Hilchos Avodah Zarah. Abraham was the founder of monotheism, and what it meant was he was part of this society that had pagan tendencies, and he broke away, and he left, and he went to a new land to try to promote his religion and his sense of theology. And that actually is the story of the Jewish people. We don't focus on this too much on Seder night. But what was happening to the Jewish people in Egypt? The Jewish people in Egypt had functionally adopted the religion of their host country, right? There was a sense that they were pagans. You know, all those midrashim about what kept the Jewish people distinct, and they kept their names, they kept their language, and there's a lot of things missing from that list, right? Like they kept monotheism, right? Was that on the list? That's not on the list. It's not on the list. And again, there's a whole other midrashic tradition. We were at the 49th level of Tuma, and if we had stayed even one more day, we would have sunk to the right. It's all an indictment, right? A whole other group of Jews never made it out because they had sunk so low. What does it mean they had sunk so low? What it means that they had sunk so low is they had sunk so low theologically. They had stopped believing in Hashem. They had adopted the theology of the Egyptians. And so Abraham is actually a nice precursor that prefigures on a national level everything that happens. The sense that we need to leave paganism behind and move forward out of that place of paganism to start something new. The Jewish people leave Egypt, they come to Sinai, and they accept the religion and theology of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Just share a very brief comment on the formulation Terach Avi Avraham. Do you ever notice that that we refer to Terach as the father of Abraham? We never refer to Abraham as the son of Terach. You never see Abraham ben Terach. Like that's not a formulation that the Torah uses. So it's just worth highlighting that observation throws into relief the capacity for a person to either identify as the son or the father, as the mother or the daughter. Am I just the child of, right? Or am I the parent? Am I the parent of, right? We get to, right? There's biology, and then there's also human choice. And part of human choice, and Abraham is perhaps the greatest exemplar of this in all of, Jewish history, you could break away. And it's not going to be that I'm the son of Terach. No, I have nothing to do with Terach. Terach was a pagan, and Terach lived. I broke away, and to the extent that anyone's going to identify, he's going to be known as Abraham's father, because Abraham is the one who charted his own path. I want to share a comment which comes up in a few places in the Haggadah of the Sfas Emes, the second Ger Rebbe. The Sfas Emes notices, and this again comes up in a couple places. I'll just mention one or two. He says, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and the whole paragraph about saying Kriya Shema at night and remembering the Exodus every day of your life. So what does that have to do with Pesach? It's actually not to do with Pesach, right? On Pesach, we're not just doing Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're doing Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's a whole other obligation. What is Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah doing at the Seder? And the Sfas Emes writes that the idea is to remind us that Seder night should spill over into the other 364 days of the year. We're doing something special tonight, not just as an anniversary and a commemoration, and once a year we do this, but as something special once a year. Our hope is that it will inform and influence everything else that goes on the other 364 days a year. The story of the sages in Bnei Brak, and they're telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim all night, and then their students come and they say, Hagi Azman Kriya Shema Shel Shachris, and the Sfas Emes says, why is that their knock at the door? Rebbe, it's time for Shema. Why isn't it Rebbe, it's morning, the Seder's over. The Seder has to be told on the night of the night of Korban Pesach, the night of the 15th, right? If it's not the night of the 15th anymore, it's now the morning of the 15th. What are you doing? You're not accomplishing the fulfillment of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim if you're doing it on the wrong time. Why don't they say that? So that's this beautiful Hasidic teaching of the Sfas Emes. No, Hagi Azman Kriya Shema Shel Shachris. Now the idea is take what you just accomplished over the course of Seder night and import it into your next opportunity, which is to remember the Exodus on a daily basis when you say Shema. So that should be different now. It can't be that the Shema this morning on the morning of the 15th is the same as yet. No, you just had a Seder that has to impact, influence, that has to transform who you are and your relationship with Hashem by the time you finished all your obligations of Seder night. I want to turn for a second to the four sons. Four sons, probably the hardest one to understand is the Russia. You know, in the 21st century, there's a big ethic of inclusivity, and there's a big ethic of making sure that we are sensitive to all types of children and children with learning differences. And it's just very hard for us to relate to someone who's at the table, who's actually present and asks a question, and maybe the question is a little off, or maybe it's a little offensive. So what? So put your arm around them and say, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you asked the question. That's such a great question. It's such a challenging question. So glad you asked it. You know, there's actually a lot to talk about here, right? Wouldn't we want to say something like that in response to the Russia? And we say to him, you know, Ilu hayasham lo hayanigal. If you were there, you wouldn't have even been redeemed. Oh my gosh, it's like, wow. I mean, how rough are we on this poor kid who just asked one, you want to even call it a wrong question? I thought all questions are good. We're supposed to be encouraging the question. We're so tough on this kid. What does that mean? If you were there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. So the Reb Tzadok of Lublin, also from a kind of Hasidic perspective, rereads the answer to this question, and he says, what you really have to do is understand what we're saying in the context of Jewish history. And he said something big actually changed. And I alluded to it a minute ago. You know, there's this Masorah that we have that not all the Jews left Egypt. It's an unflattering part of the story, and we don't emphasize it too much, but they had assimilated, or they were so far off the reservation that, Moshe announced, we're leaving, and, they didn't leave. They didn't merit to leave. They didn't want to leave, whatever the case may be. Some significant percentage of the Israelites stayed behind. They weren't redeemed. And Reb Tzadok of Lublin says, in Egypt, that was sui generis. That was a one-time moment in Jewish history where we drew a line. You're either with us or you're not. It's just very simple. It's like, who's going to be a part of this nation that's about to march to Sinai and about to march into the promised land? Everyone, you come. Like, this is it. Are you in or you out? And if you were a Russia, whatever that term means, if you were a Russia at that moment in Jewish history, you were excluded and you did not come. You didn't merit it, you didn't warrant it, you didn't earn it, and you weren't redeemed. And so what we're saying to the Russia is that was a historical moment. We don't actually function like that anymore. There was a time, right? Had you been there then, we actually would have cast you off. And that would have been the end of this conversation. But now is not then, and here is not Egypt, and this is a different moment in Jewish history. And so the fact that you are at the table, and the fact that you are in conversation, the fact that you are asking a question, means that you will have a different fate. And we're all looking forward to the day when we will merit the ultimate redemption. If you'd been in Egypt, it would be a different story. But when it comes to the future of the Jewish people, you're actually with us. And I think that's kind of a nice way to reframe and to reorient our relationship to the quote unquote Russia at the table, the Russia who's very much with us. I want to talk for a minute or two.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, I just wanted to
Yeah.
point out that
Yeah.
leaving Egypt it was the Jews who decided that they didn't want to come. It was their decision.
Yeah,
And here, to have the Russia at the table, it's his decision to come to the table.
it's a great point. It's a great point, right? Like the famous comment to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? It's the fifth son who didn't even come, right?
Mhm.
They're so lost that they didn't even come to a seder. Everybody
Right,
comes to a seder, but there's some
right,
kid who didn't even come to the seder. So at least this kid, and again, it's just a metaphor. It doesn't have to be a kid. It could be anybody, but this kid is present, right? So the fact
right,
that they decided to show up at the seder, give them a hug. Like that's great, right? Whatever happened in the past that defined you as a Russia, like that's yesterday. But now we're at a Seder, it's Mangu Latenu, and the whole future of the Jewish
right.
people is ahead of us, and we want to bring you in. We want you to come with us. Wanted to say a word or two about Arami Oved Avi. Arami Oved Avi. I mentioned in passing last night that this section of the Haggadah is the learning section of the Haggadah. It's the academic section. Right? This is the kind of learning that you would do if you were in the base medrash. So what do? We take four psukim from the beginning of Parshas Kisavo, known as Mikra Bikurim. These are the four psukim that the Torah uses to describe Jewish history. When the farmer would bring his first fruits to the temple, we take them in the Haggadah and we do exegesis. We do midrash, and the pasuk says these few words, but what do they really mean? And there's two possibilities, but one of them is better than the other, and we'll duke it out and we'll debate it. And there's two different traditions, and we could explain it, and it's a drasha, right? And so we go through this, piece by piece. It's actually some Haggadahs do this better than others, but sometimes you like lose yourself. It's like, was that the pasuk or is that the drasha? I don't even remember where we are, right? Because we get so deep and we get so lost in the discussion and in the process of exegesis. So there's a big question here, which is why of all sections, let's just say we want to perform, and we'll talk more about it in a minute. We want to perform some learning, some like actual learning, base medrash style learning at the Seder. So wonderful. Let's do it. The question is, and again, you're not gonna pick 100 psukim, right? That everyone understands there's a time crunch, there's a lot to accomplish. So you're gonna pick something small, a couple nuggets, and you're gonna work on that. So why of all the psukim that you could pick do we pick these? There are many answers suggested to this question. I'll just share one, which which is very meaningful and very significant, and that is um, when the farmer comes and brings his first fruits to the temple. So his whole orientation, his whole attitude, right? These psukim, why is he telling history? He's telling history to put in context how thankful he is. We came to this land. Let me tell you about my ancestors. My great grandfather was a wandering Aramean. He was a nomad. He didn't have any land, and then we went through these terrible years of slavery and oppression. But God redeemed us. He took us to the promised land, and now I'm a farmer. It's unbelievable, right? It's a success story, right? My grandparents, they came from nothing, and their parents had nothing, and they didn't have two pennies to their name. And now, bounty overflowing. Here's my basket, right? I'm giving you this, just my first fruits. You should see what my farm looks like, back home and wherever my farm is. And the whole attitude, the whole context within which this farmer is telling this story is the context of gratitude. I'm so happy. I'm so excited. I'm so thankful that I'm able to be here in this moment. We've talked in the past a little bit about this in other contexts, but part of the theme, one of the major themes of Leil HaSeder is the notion of gratitude, the notion of saying thank you to Hashem for allowing us to fill in the blank, for allowing us to have the religious liberty to be celebrating this Seder. That's not a given. Look at Jewish history. How many of our great grandparents didn't have the opportunity, for one reason or another, to be observing a Pesach Seder? How many of our great grandparents didn't have the foods on the Seder plate that, again, we take for granted, and that we can have Shulchan Aruch and be able to say v'achalta v'savata v'rachta, right? That we have enough food to be sated. Who had food? And I have a home and I have shelter. Look at bounty, right? And that's part of the attitude that we want to capture on Seder night. V'gadta lebincha, right? The whole notion of Haggadah, we often translate as, right, the notion of Magid. We're telling the story of the Jewish. That's all true, but the Targum on the line in Parshas Kisavo, when the farmer shows up, translates the word vehigata as to give praise. Lahagid is also to say thank you. And so the Haggadah and the Seder and the whole trajectory of the evening borrows from this beautiful moment, this ceremony when the farmer comes and he's just so thankful. That's what we're trying to tap into. And again, there's so much. There's so much that we have to be thankful for, irrespective of whatever troubles are ailing us locally, globally. It's all true. But that doesn't take away one iota from our responsibility to be makir tov, to acknowledge and to thank Hashem for all the bounty that we enjoy in our lives.
Rabbi,
Yes.
quick question. Well, maybe it's not a quick question. I always find it, I don't know if the word is moving. It's, let's say, complicated that during the Holocaust, when people were in camps, you hear these stories about how they celebrated Pesach.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it's stunning to me. And I think this explanation, how does this work? And maybe it doesn't apply in that context.
Right. No, it's a big question. And I don't mean to minimize any of the traumas or travails of our parents and grandparents and ancestors. All I'm saying is that whatever the circumstance, right, and we could talk about the psychology, behind this, but whatever the circumstance, there's always something for which to be grateful for. So that's a piece of this. That's a piece of this message wherever we are. And again, I maybe exaggerated, right? The farmer, Elu Dvarim She'en Lehem Shiur. We're focusing on this moment of Bikurim. The farmer might come with a literal wagon load of grapes, or he might come with one grape. This is my first fruit. Right? Maybe this is what I have, and I don't have a wagon load to give away because I'm not a person of means, but I have something, and for what I have, I'm grateful for. Let me just say a footnote about Arami Ovid Avi. Rami Ovid Avi backs us up again to this question of where to start the story and what's our history and what's our prehistory. We come back to Lavan, Yaakov and Lavan, and again, whenever that happens, we have to sort of just interrogate it and say, why? Why is that an appropriate place to flag the story of the Jewish people? And Bikesh, Lakor Esakol. What does that mean that Lavan wanted to wipe us out entirely? So probably the most compelling answer to that question is that what Lavan hoped to do is take control of the Jewish family. Remember when Yaakov escapes and he skulks off into the night and Lavan chases him and Lavan catches up to him and he finally says, what are you doing? These are my daughters. And that's really the key to understanding the debate between Yaakov and Lavan. Lavan was never willing to let them go. He knew that his daughters were marrying the monotheists, that Abraham family, but he wasn't just ready to say, oh, my kids and grandkids will be members of that clan. He wanted to be the head of that clan, and he wanted to bring his son-in-law into his way of thinking, into his pagan ideology. And had he been successful, he would have assimilated the children and grandchildren of Yaakov, and that would have been the end of the Jewish story. And so maybe, and again, this is just a kind of footnote or a parenthesis, maybe this is just a kind of reminder. When we retell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, it'd be very easy to walk away with the message that Jewish continuity is contingent upon our being able to overcome the paros of the world. So we need political victory, we need military victory. And so maybe the Haggadah is just giving us a little counterweight. Remember that we also have to overcome the Lavans of the world. And if there's pressure on our kids and our grandkids to acculturate and to assimilate and to move away from the path of their parents and grandparents, we also have to be sensitive to that. And Jewish continuity will hinge as much, if not more, on our capacity to resist acculturation as it will on our capacity to defeat, the military or political enemies of the Jewish people. I want to share one thought that I actually shared last night. In one of the psukim that we darshan in Arami Ovid Avi is we say Vayareu Asanu HaMitzrim, and to the untrained eye, or even in many translations, the rendering of Vayareu Asanu HaMitzrim is the Egyptians did evil to us. Vayareu from the word Ra'ah, they were evil. And so they did evil to us. And we know this, they oppressed us and they enslaved us and they beat us and they took away our liberty. They did evil to us. But from a grammatical perspective, Vayareu Osanu doesn't mean that. If you wanted to say they did evil to us, Vayareu Lanu, they did evil to us, Lanu. Vayareu Osanu, Rav Soloveitchik actually translates it almost exactly this way. He says it's that they made us out to be evil. They made us out to be evil. Even though we were the victims, they said, oh, look, those are the bad guys. Those are the bad guys. And it's a tiny little grammatical nuance. It's nothing. And yet the whole story hinges on that little word. And I just think there's so much resonance in this particular moment, right? The people who said, October 7th, those people living there, those aren't the victims. Those are people guilty of war crimes. Those are people guilty of it's an exact, right? This is right 3,000 years later. It's exactly what happened by Yareu Osanu. They made us out, and you could put it in the present tense. They are making us out. They are making us out to be evil. Right? And it's a very dastardly move, right? To turn the people who should rightfully be considered the victims into the people who are being accused of being the bad guys. So I think there's a lot to, again, it's just a nugget, but so much to think about and to talk about Pesach 2024. Okay. Leon Cass, who I've quoted on many occasions in our learning together, has a book that just came out in the last year or two. His commentary on Exodus was on my desk. It's not on my desk at this moment. It's called something like "Founding a Nation." You just Google Leon Cass and Exodus; it'll come right up. It's a wonderful and very provocative commentary on the book of Exodus. And I just wanted to share with you two comments on the 10 plagues. You know, you think you've heard everything and read everything and seen everything about the 10 plagues, and it's 3 sets of 3, and these are the patterns, and this is what, each set represented. There's something just so elementary and so elegant that he says about the pattern of the plagues that I just wanted to share with you. He says the chronological sequence across the first 9 plagues moves cosmically upwards from the waters. Just picture the 10 plagues in your head. If you have a Haggadah, you could look at them. Dam, Tzfardeh, Akinim, Arv, right? It's cosmically upward from the waters to the earth, to living things, people and beasts, to the heavens, until what's the 9th plague? Choshech, to the sun itself. So I think it's so simple and so beautiful to just recognize that it's an attack on each element, the waters below the earth, then the living things, on the earth, then the heavens, and then the sun. And as you know from, the Metropolitan Museum's Egyptology section, right, everything in Egypt is a god and a representation, and right. So across all spectrums, right, the first 9 plagues are an attack on every possible cosmic part of Egyptian theology. And then Leon Kass has a beautiful comment about the 10th plague, the plague of the firstborn. And I'll just share with you a quote from his book. He says, "To kill the firstborn is a more than symbolic way of overthrowing the widespread human tendency to regard nature as primary and authoritative, which is to say, worthy of reverence or divine." So just to unpack that, if you bow to birth order, and this was very common in the ancient Near East, right? You say the firstborn son, the law of primogeniture, that's the next head of the clan. Did they earn it? Are they the most worthy? Are they the most meritorious? We're not asking those questions. Firstborn son, you become, right? And this is, again, this lasted for thousands of years in monarchies and in governments, and right. So just by virtue of your birth order, that's it, right? We suspend all other calculi. Is that a word? Plural of calculus?
Calculations.
Calculations.
Yes.
Right. We suspend everything else, right? Which is, in fact, preposterous. So the death of the firstborn says, stop worshiping, right? The first 9 attack the worship of everything else in the cosmic universe. And then the 10th plague actually attacks the notion of worshiping nature itself. Like, oh, this is what nature produced. The firstborn child was so-and-so. Let's put them in charge. Really? Why? And so what the 10th plague argues is that what you should be bowing to is not happenstance of nature, but actually divine morality. Come with us. We're going to get a Torah. Hashem's going to tell you what that morality, looks like, and what a divine ethic looks like, and that should guide your principles and decisions, not just how order shakes out of its own accord. Okay. Let me just share one final comment from Leon Kass, since we're talking about his book. Also, it's so simple, but really so profound. What do we eat at the Pesach Seder? So we eat matzah and maror, and if we were living in temple times, we would eat Pesach, matzah, and maror. So he just says, just go back to the beginning for a second. There's always a debate since time immemorial. There's always a debate between shepherds, and farmers. And if those of you who are on our December mission to Israel, we learned about this from our tour guide, who told us about what happens when you have Bedouins who are nomadic and who are shepherds. What happens when they clash with the folks who have permanent homes and are actually farmers, right? And it's ongoing, right? Thousands of years later. A different way of relating to the world, and a different way of relating to land, and a different way of relating to nature. And it's oil and water, and they're always clashing. Leon Kass says, you have matzah and maror, which are produced by farmers. And you have the Korban Pesach, which is produced by shepherds. And you eat them together at the Seder to symbolize that it really is possible for everyone to come together around the same meal and around the same table. And it's a beautiful aspiration, right? That the people who are, however you want to take the symbolism, the shepherds and farmers, the Hatfields and the McCoys of our lives, the people with whom we ideologically disagree. Oh, that person voted for, I could never talk to them. Or, no, that's the farmer and I'm a shepherd. They're a farmer. And we could figure it out. And we could find a way to, in this case, almost literally, right? The expression break bread together, right? Actually, on Pesach, we break the bread, right? Because it's pretty breakable. Hopefully, it at least came whole, or at least a few matzahs came whole. And then we break the bread, we break the matzahs, and hopefully that's that's a symbolism for our capacity to bring people together. And it's an echo of something that we started with, right? What's happening at the Seder is we're bringing families together across generations. There might be friction between parents and children. We bring them together. There's a Russia in the family system, and they're at our table, and we bring them together. There's the Hatfields and the McCoys, there's the shepherds and the farmers, because there's people with whom we have ideological differences that are that's a yawning chasm. We're never going to see eye to eye. I'm a hawk and you're a dove, and we're never going to agree. Except, right, one night of the year, we could sit around the table and talk about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the themes of salvation and Exodus and liberty, and on Jewish history and Jewish destiny. Hopefully we can agree, or at least agree to disagree, and be in conversation with one another. I think it's a beautiful aspiration to keep in mind, particularly at times when there's so much fractiousness in the world. Speaking of Pesach Matzah and Maror, right? This is where Magid ends with the statement of Rabban Gamliel that you need to say the explanation for Pesach Matzah and Maror at the Seder. So, what is the meaning of the word Pesach? So, of course, we always translate it, and it's a perfectly justifiable translation, as Passover, right? What does it mean that Hashem passed over the homes? And we'll just say the line that the pasuk that we quote at the Seder. Pesach shahayu abuseinu ochlim bizman shebeis hamikdash hayakam al shuma al shum shepasach hakadosh baruch hu al batei abuseinu b'Mitzrayim. So why are we eating this Pesach? Because Hashem passed over the homes of our ancestors in Egypt. Right? What's the moment? It's the night of the Exodus, and it's the night of Makas Bechoros. So we've daubed the blood of the Korban Pesach on the mezuzahs and the lintel and the mashkof, and the blood that the homes that have the blood are passed over. We survive, and the other homes have calamity. Firstborn children in those homes perish. That's the simple understanding of Pesach. And Rav Kook says there's another way to understand Pesach, and it's if you go back to the story of Eliyahu on Har Carmel. And he says to the Jewish people, right? For how long will you be poschim al shtei seifim? How long will you, we would say in English, like straddle the fence? There was a contest between Eliyahu, and you remember the whole story on Har Carmel with worshippers of Baal, the Nevi'ei HaBaal, and Eliyahu says, how long are you going to do it? You have to choose a side, right? The Jewish people hadn't abandoned Hashem; they were faithful to Hashem, but they were also faithful to this God called Baal. And Eliyahu says, you got to give it up. You can't be on both sides. So what does poschim al shtei seifim mean? Rav Kook says to be poseach means to reside. How long will you inhabit both of these camps, the camp of Baal and the camp of Hashem? You have to pick one. And so Rav Kook says that's actually what we're after. That's another deeper meaning of the word Pesach. The idea is for Hashem to reside in our home. He says, go back and plug it in. You can read the pasuk equally well with this translation, right? The pasuk says, right? Al shum, the reading from the Haggadah, al shum shepasach hakadosh baruch hu al batei avuseinu b'Mitzrayim. That Hashem dwelt in the homes of those Jewish families in Egypt who had placed the blood on the door. There's a whole midrashic literature that says, those homes, like the table, the mashka, it became the mizbeach. They weren't eating a korban; it was just an animal, but we called it a korban pesach, right? Because they had made a sign that they were going to be faithful, that they were going to be dedicated to the cause, that they were going to join the Jewish people. That's what it meant. Amen. And if you said Amen, then Hashem responded by saying, Amen. And I'm going to dwell with you in your home on Seder night in Mitzrayim. And it's our hope that by replicating that process, again, in the absence of the temple without a Korban Pesach, but by observing the Seder, the goal is for Hashem to be present in our home, as well. Okay. Time for a couple more quick hits. There's a line that we never talk about at the Seder. It's a line from benching. So at Seder night, you only say this at Seder night once a year, or if you're in Chutz La'aretz, maximum twice a year. The Harachamans at the end of benching, it's already very late. Who's paying attention? But we say this amazing line. We say, Harachaman, Hu Yanchilenu, Yom Shekulo Tov. Hashem should grant us a day that will be, all good. We say that Harachaman on every Yantif. And then we add Yom Shekulo Aruch, Yom Shatzadikim Yoshvim V'atroseim B'Rashem V'nenim Miziv Hashchina V'hichalkenu Imahem. Will you grant us a day when the tzaddikim of the world, when the righteous will sit with their crowns on their heads, basking in the divine presence. So what is that symbolism? What are the crowns on the heads? And I think we always kind of just say, we've already had a couple cups of wine by that point. It's pretty late. And probably the best we come up with is, it's a night of liberty. We're all supposed to be kings and queens and princes. And so there's an image of somebody wearing a crown. It all fits in. And Rabbi Yehuda Kook says there's another layer of meaning to this expression, and he cites pretty amazing Gemara in Maseches Rosh Hashanah. So come with me on a brief excursion, and then we'll return to the crowns. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says what happens during a Yovel year. And there's some resonance because in a Yovel year, in a Jubilee year, once every 50 years, slaves go free. Slaves go free. So it's interesting to think about that at a Seder because the story of the Exodus is the story of slaves going free. So the Gemara says, well, when do they go free? Anyone know? What's the date on the calendar when the slaves go free? The slaves go free on Yom Kippur. You sound the shofar on a Yovel year. You sound the shofar on Yom Kippur, and that emancipates all the slaves in the land of Israel. And then the Gemara says something fascinating. What's the status of the slaves between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? The new year started, right? The Gemara also knows that the new year starts on Rosh Hashanah, but the first of Tishrei is the first of Tishrei. The Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei. So what's the status of the slaves? The Jubilee started on Rosh Hashanah. So, but now they're waiting. Like, what's the status between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of the slaves in that Jubilee year? Listen to the words of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Mikan Am Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka had the following Masara: Rosh Hashanah ad Yom Kippurim lo hayu avadim niftarim levateim. From Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, slaves were not permitted to go free. They had to remain in the homes of their masters. Velo mishtabadin ladunehem, and yet they were not beholden to their masters. They don't have the status of slave anymore, but they can't quite go free. Ela ochlin v'shosin v'smechim. They would drink and eat, and they would dine happily because they knew that their freedom is just around the corner. V'atrosehem beroshehem, and they would wear crowns. Rashi says, what were they wearing crowns for? V'atrosehem beroshehem imratza lasum atara berosho laharos sheyatza chavshi. That if they wanted to, they could put a crown on their head to symbolize that they were about to go free. So Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook says something so beautiful. He says that from here you see that crowns symbolically, right, even in the Gemara, right, even in this moment of actual, right, there was a transaction happening, like something's really transitioning, a slave is going free, but symbolically, in that moment, by wearing a crown, the slave would show everyone, look, I'm not a slave anymore. I'm actually free. As a technicality, it's not Yom Kippur yet, so I haven't left. But right now I'm free. And so what the Haggadah means when it says we're longing for the days when the tzaddikim will wear crowns on their heads, right? Tonight is the night of freedom. And so we long for the day of ultimate freedom, when the tzaddikim will also be able to wear crowns on their heads and symbolize that, in fact, from all the things that might enslave them, they are actually free. I want to say a word about Hallel. There's a beautiful comment, really an essay, which I'll just kind of summarize from Rav David Silber. The head of Drisha. He used to live here on the Upper West Side before he and his family made Aliyah. He says, there's something to notice about the singing of Hallel on Seder night. It's very special, and it's actually laden with meaning. Why is it laden with meaning? He says, we've been talking a lot about freedom, and freedom, in a lot of ways, means freedom of expression. And he says this is one of the reasons why we have the Haggadah, and we don't designate so much effort and energy and time to the discussion of the Haggadah. There's the content of the discussion, which we've been talking about, but there's also just the form, the fact of discussion. He says, the slave doesn't get to do that. The slave doesn't get to have a freedom of expression. The slave doesn't get to have a freedom of opinion. So the form itself on Seder night is also so evocative of what it is that we're meant to be celebrating. The sense that we can talk and we can argue and we can debate and we can discuss and we can have a conversation. That in and of itself is an expression of our freedom, of our liberty. He says that's on one plane. He says on another plane we express that freedom through prayer and song. In a parallel way, neither does the slave have the capacity to really pray or to really sing. And it can, but it's going to be very, very limited. And he says, it's a mirror. What did you see in the story of the Israelites in slavery and in the course of their move from slavery to liberation? What you see at the beginning of the Exodus story is that the Jewish people are so oppressed that they're not even able to pray. The Torah says they just groan, right? Hashem hears their cry, not their prayers, because they don't have the words, they don't have the ability. They're just right. It's the first oy vey, right, in Jewish history. They don't have the capacity to pray and sing. And yet, by the time you get to the end of the story, wow, Kriyas Yamsuf, Az Yashir, these people who didn't even have the words to say, Hashem help us, are now singing together with Moshe these beautiful words of poetry, these beautiful words of lyrical song. And so we also mirror that same trajectory. And by the time we get to the end of the Seder, it's our goal, it's our aspiration to be in a place where we can daven and where we can sing as a form of expression, just as the Jewish people, when they were freed, were able to express themselves in tefillah and in song, and Hallel becomes one of the themes, one of the great themes of the of Seder nights. Just conclude with something I've shared in the past. One of my favorite thoughts from my friend and former chavrusa, Rabbi David Walensky, who's now in Philadelphia. He used to be the assistant rabbi at Ohab Tzedek, and he said, "Echad mi yodea," this song at the end of the Seder, like a nursery rhyme. Right? There's no reference to Yitzias Mitzrayim, and there's no reference to Moshe Rabbeinu, and there's no reference to Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. It's like, what does it have to do with the price of tea in China? Why are we singing Echad Miyodea? Who knows six? Six of the orders of the Mishnah. Wonderful. Let's sing it on Shavuos. Like, what does that have to do with the Seder? So he said, it's a kind of litmus test. When you get through the Seder, you should be transformed. You should be a new person. You should have reached a new level of Jewish consciousness. And the kind of barometer is this song, right? It's like a Rorschach. Like, what's your first? I say 8. What's your first association? And if your first association is bris milah, well, then it worked. I say 5, you say 5 of the books of the Torah, right? It's an associative game. And by the time we get to the end of the Seder, our goal is for you to have won that game. So that all I have to do is just say, anything, any number, and your whole outlook, your whole orientation will be, right, someone who's been liberated by Hashem from Exodus to, right, from slavery to freedom, from Egypt to Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael, and now, right, the Jewish world is your oyster, and so that everything that I see is now seen through the lens of Torah and mitzvos and my capacity to serve Hashem. And if it's really worked, then I'm going to say 1 is Hashem, and 2 are the tablets, and 3 are the avos, and 4 are the imaz, and I'm going to go right down the list. And I'm going to bat 1,000 because my whole orientation is transformed into answering the question, how can I be, right? Used to be an Eved to Paro, and now I'm an Eved Hashem. How can I be the best Eved Hashem in the next 364 days following the Seder? We're going to stop here, but I'm happy to stay on and take questions and comments. For those of you who I won't see, I wish everyone a Chag Kasher V'Sameach.
Big thank you, Rabbi. A great
Thank you.
start to this season.
Food for thought. We all need the ultimate redemption, but we're
Absolutely.
working
Yeah.
on it.
All right.
Thank you so
Sameach.
Thank
Chag
you,
Sameach.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Very, very revelatory.
Thank you very much.
so much.
Beautiful, very
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. And now it's Vicky, back to the kitchen.
Back to the kitchen.
Thank you.
All right.
Stay well.
Everyone have a Chag Sameach.
Do we have to sell the chametz in person?
Yes, you